to really talk about like what to say, how to support, how to be there for somebody that you're concerned is living with an eating disorder, some disordered eating behaviors.
Yeah. All right, I'm in the control center. I'd like to start off with a land honoring. It's something I've been practicing, so I thought, why not give it a go tonight? And honoring is recognition of the current importance and value of the land we're on. So it's not just acknowledgement. It's not just, saying some stuff. It's actually connecting with the land we're on and doing some research on what's going on. So this presentation is being presented on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat territory. This traditional territory, known as pre-contact Toronto, which means the trees meet the water, was surrendered under the Toronto Purchase Treaty of Treaty 13. Tonight, we thank these current communities for continuing to balance ecosystems, bringing awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the preservation of protected areas. Land honoring is also about celebrating Indigenous brilliance. And so the way I like to do that is sharing like the Nahani creative that teaches about these land honoring. So there's a link down there as well. Lastly, land honorings is also about presenting yourself and saying who you are. So Mallory's going to start us off with that.
Thank you. So my name is Mallory. I'm a therapist here at Shift Collab. A large part of my practice and focus is around supporting clients through their eating.
Mallory, I think you're muted. There we go.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So I'll start from the beginning just in case. Yeah. So my name is Mallory. I'm a therapist here at Shift Collab. I support clients through their eating disorders and disordered eating. And in addition to that, a large focus of my practice is around supporting those carers in that person's life, parents, loved ones, friends. And I think that's a really important sort of group of folks to really work with and think about because of how complex eating disorders can really be, which we'll get into a little bit later. And in addition to that, I also work with clients living with anxiety and mood disorders.
Yeah, and my name is Kendra. I'm also a therapist at Shift Collab. My focus is also on eating disorders, and my clinical interests are also on trauma and anxiety and depression as well.
Okay. So we wanted to share an agenda just in terms of what to expect over the next hour or so that we have together. We will be kicking things off with some myth busting around eating disorders. And the reason we're doing that tonight is because of the so many misconceptions that are out there. We'd really like to sort of narrow in on what are the facts around eating disorders, and we'll have everybody get to participate in a little quiz around that. Next, we'll move into what are eating disorders? What do they look like? How are they diagnosed? We will then move on to the do's and don'ts of supporting a loved one. These will just provide you with some tips and tricks to ensure that when you are providing support to somebody living with an eating disorder or disordered eating, you're doing so in a way that's really compassionate. Finally, we'll leave you with some of our favorite resources that are out there and open it up to a Q&A. And with that being said, I would encourage you throughout tonight's webinar, if you do have a question pop up, please feel free to put it in the chat. We'll make sure that we get to all of those towards the end. In addition to that, our chat feature will not be recorded. So for those that aren't comfortable sort of speaking up with their question and having their face on camera here, the chat is a nice confidential option for you. Okay. So with that, we'll get started. I will read out a statement to all of you, and I'd love it if you could just put in the chat whether or not you think that statement is a fact or a myth. And our first one is, an eating disorder is not a serious mental illness. So you're welcome to call it out. If you think that's a fact or a myth, you could put it in the chat. Okay. Seeing a myth. Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. That is absolutely a myth. To qualify for a diagnosis of an eating disorder, you must meet specific criteria that's identified within the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And in fact, of all psychiatric disorders, anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate. Suicide is actually the second leading cause of death after cardiac disease. Other issues that can arise include malnutrition, low blood pressure, slowed breathing and pulse, damage to the heart and heart function, severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances. These are just some of the symptoms that could be life-threatening. Okay, next one. Eating disorders are a women's illness. What do we think? Fact or myth? Absolutely. You're correct again. That is a myth. In the United States alone, eating disorders will affect 10 million males at some point in their lives. And due to large part and cultural bias, they're actually much likely to seek treatment for their eating disorder. They're less likely to seek help and talk about it with medical professionals because it's associated with having a feminine diagnosis. And they're often misdiagnosed by medical professionals and even misdismissed. It's also important to note that in previous versions of the diagnostic manual, criteria for diagnosis of an eating disorder included like a loss of a menstrual period. And so that criterion has since been eliminated. But you can imagine that really did sort of block and not allow a large group of individuals to be diagnosed. Next one, you can tell if someone has an eating disorder by looking at them. Fact or myth? Absolutely, you're all right again. People who suffer from eating disorders can come in all shapes and sizes. The media and other public discussions around eating disorders, they focus on a very specific diagnosis, anorexia, where most sufferers often display the symptom of being severely underweight. But it's important to note that individuals who suffer from eating disorders can be of any weight, and that weight can really fluctuate. Folks can be malnourished while remaining within an appropriate weight range as well. So great job, everyone. Most people diagnosed with an eating disorder have at least one other psychiatric illness. What do we think? Fact or myth? Absolutely, that is a fact. Most commonly, those diagnosed with an eating disorder might live with anxiety disorders such as obsessive compulsive disorder or mood disorders such as major depressive disorder. You got it. Eating disorders are just about food. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of myths. Absolutely. That's right.
A little trigger happy on that one.
While eating disorders generally involve an obsession with calories, weight, or shape, These illnesses are also rooted in biological, psychological, and sociocultural aspects. So there's also many factors at play here that we see with eating disorders, including food restriction, binging of food, purging, overexercising. So there's absolutely a lot more at play here than just the food component. And our final question: eating disorders are a choice. Fact or myth? Absolutely. You're all 6 for 6. That is a myth. In fact, when symptoms really start to develop and strengthen, and somebody's lifestyle starts to become more rigid as a result of an eating disorder, those suffering, they might not even realize that they qualify for an eating disorder. While some genetic predispositions can make someone more likely to develop an eating disorder, there are also many social and environmental factors that can play a role. The key messaging here is, just like a broken leg, an eating disorder is an illness that requires treatment and support and would be really difficult for somebody to overcome on their own. Thank you all so much for participating. You all did great.
100%. Smart bunch here tonight, that's for sure. Thanks, Mallory. I am going to go into our part 2, which is defining an eating disorder. And the first step would be defining that exactly. So an eating disorder is a mental health challenge that is characterized by extreme food or weight preoccupation, and eating behaviors that are harmful or impactful to physical and mental health. Note that a specific weight range isn't mentioned here. We'll get into a little bit more of that on the next slide, but it's just really characterized by emotions, behaviors, as well as thoughts, and I'll show that on the next one. This is what I like to show my clients. I like to show them this the eating disorder continuum. So as you can see on the far side, on the wellness side, it's mostly positive feelings about body shape and size. I say mostly, and this is from Body Brave, which is a Hamilton recovery center, but they have great resources out there. So mostly positive feelings that they say, it's because we're living in such a toxic society. We're living in such a society that promotes the diet culture. So it's kind of hard to have 100% body confidence these days for everyone. So mostly positive is considered wellness. There's no good or bad foods. Food is food. Food is fuel, and food can be used for gathering and celebrations, right? There's no healthy, clean eating, or there's no junk food either. Lastly, regular and moderate exercise. I'd also say, exercise. I work with a lot of athletes, so moderate exercise isn't really in their life. So it's extreme exercise. But I would say exercise for pleasure, competition, or passion. One shift over is preoccupation with food and body. So this is that individuals that don't like their appearance and they're trying to lose a couple pounds. There's frequent thoughts about food, eating, and their body. And they sometimes feel guilty or bad for when they've eaten and try and make up for it. And making up for it looks like exercising or restricting a certain food or frequency of eating. One last step over before we get into the eating disorder side is the disordered eating symptoms. Disordered eating is quite a broad term. It's not defined yet in the DSM-5, but it's really becoming very common. Me and Mallory were discussing just how common the disordered eating term is becoming, and we are seeing a lot of clients that identify with this term. Disordered eating symptoms is, again, the thinking, behaviors, and emotions intensify while you're one step over. And this is thinking about food and body, and these interfere with daily activities. So individuals who don't go out to social gatherings because they're eating, right? Or individuals that have to come home to binge or refuel. It's really just about, these behaviors impacting their abilities and activities they want to join. Next is rigidity in eating patterns. These are food rules involving frequency, type of food they're eating, as well as amount. Everyone's got different ones, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And lastly, working hard to change their body and compensating for eating. And I would add compensating exercise, of course, restricting as well as vomitings, also known as purging, and taking laxatives as well, or diuretics. Lastly, it's the eating disorder end. And each of these, again, all of those symptoms we just talked about intensify even more. And then Mallory's going to take you through the specifics of a couple of them, the key important ones.
So when we sort of take a look at some of the overarching eating disorders, and I'm going to take you through really some of the main themes of each today. There's obviously a lot more that goes into getting a diagnosis and what these disorders look like, how they play out on a daily basis. But just as a broad overview for this evening, we'll start with anorexia nervosa, which is probably one of the most commonly known and understood of the eating disorders. It's a life-threatening mental illness, which is characterized by behaviors that interfere with maintaining an adequate weight. And some of those behaviors I had mentioned earlier, including the food restriction, the overexercise, severe like calorie counting. There's lots of different components that come into play there. The next one is bulimia nervosa. It's also a mental illness characterized by periods of food restriction, but it's followed by binge eating with recurrent compensating behaviors to allow the body to purge itself of the food that it's consumed. The next one is avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder. For short, it's referred to as ARFID. And it involves limitations in the amount and/or types of food consumed. What's important to note here about ARFID is that it doesn't have to include any distress about somebody's body shape or size or any fear of fatness. So it could be completely unrelated to somebody's body image and appearance. The next one is binge eating disorder. It's a mental illness that can seriously affect somebody's psychological and physical health. It's characterized by recurrent episodes of eating large quantities of food, often in a very short period of time. And that person often experiences a lot of shame, distress, and guilt afterwards. It's not uncommon for somebody with binge eating disorder to eat until the point of physical pain and discomfort. The next one is other specified feeding or eating disorder. Now, this is a disorder that refers to atypical presentations of things like anorexia and bulimia and binge eating disorder. So for example, somebody might have all the same characteristics for a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. However, their appearance appears to be at a normal weight. And that could be for many reasons, like they could have began significant weight loss while in a bigger body, or in a higher weight to begin with. And so somebody like that might qualify for this diagnosis. The last piece on here is other eating disorders. And as I mentioned, like there are many out there. We did provide a resource to NEDIC, the National Eating Disorder Information Center. So for those that are interested in getting some more information about the different disorders, you can click on that link and it'll take you to some really great information.
Mm. And it's important to note too that they really shift as well, right, Mallory? Like they always are shifting to at least in my chair, and I'm sure yours as well, just in the therapist chair. Yeah, thank you. So the next is what causes an eating disorder. And so we're kind of going to break that down. There is tons of different factors. If there's anything to take away from these slides, there's a ton, and they're usually a unique combination to everyone. We don't fully understand, like researchers in the world don't completely understand what causes it. There's still a lot of unknowns. There's still a lot of research that needs to go into it. But I've pinned down a couple, just the broader ones. So number one, Mallory mentioned this before, genetic vulnerability. This refers to the person's ability to develop an eating disorder strictly based on their genetics. So research has been shown that a combination of genetics can actually make you inherit an eating disorder. And again, more research is needed, but there's some good stuff out there. depicting what exactly happens in the exact combination, which is pretty cool. The next factor that I would highlight is psychological determinants. This is Mallory's, again, her myth of, or her fact of, that there's many comorbidities. These psychological determinants and factors can include perfectionism, OCD, anxiety, depression. All of these can really factor into developing an eating disorder. Lastly, is sociocultural influences, and this is probably the most well-known. A lot of people think eating disorders are just based off of social media, right? But as we're saying, no, it's not just about weight, it's not just about body, right? However, it is important, right? These sociocultural influences refer to external sources like social media, marketing, magazines, all of that. And then also relationships, peers, family, teachers, coaches, and of course, like any authority of influence or right? So celebrities, etc. Yeah, those are quite impactful. So the question of how do I know if my loved one has an eating disorder? Again, me and Mallory and I narrowed down some signs, right? Everyone's different, everyone's unique, but these are some common ones that we've pinpointed. Oops. So number one, weight concerns, pretty obvious. So these are, an individual who expresses concerns about their body shape, weight. They'll talk excessively about food or clean eating and or dieting, right? Quite an indication, but again, right, unique. Some people never will talk about this stuff, and it doesn't mean they don't have an ED, right? The second one is meal preparation. So I find a lot of my clients have a big interest in cooking and baking. They'll even, get a job close to food or baking, but they don't actually eat the food. Another example is that they'll make their own food. So if you have a family dinner and you all are eating the same thing, they'll tend to make their own, or they'll make a safer meal. And that's just, again, it speaks to their control. It speaks to them feeling safe. Which leads me to my next point, which is control over food. So individuals ED tend to want complete control over the food. So that means cooking it, that means preparing it. Another example of where you can see this is when if you go out to a restaurant with these individuals, they will, and let's say they don't have the meal that they plan to eat, that can be really triggering, really upsetting. And that's a big indication that, something's happening over there. Yeah, the next one is exercise. So, everyone exercises in their own ways, but if you're noticing an increase in exercise regimen without increasing the caloric intake, and another sign would be being anxious or upset when missing an exercise as well. Another sign, moving on, there we go, is food and meal rituals. These are the rigid food rules that Mallory and I were talking about. And these can be, again, very, very unique to the individual. These are habitual behaviors during or after meals. They can also be included in exercise. Some really common ones are, again, eating away from everyone, so eating in their bedroom. Some could be during the meals, so cutting things into smaller pieces or ordering them. And another one could be, going to the bathroom after to purge after eating a meal as well. So just keeping an eye out for these behaviors. Next is mood. So ED tends to increase depression, anxiety, irritability, and fatigue as well. And they make the changes more extreme. So some person could be super anxious and then drop down to the depression, right? And of course, these are characterized too by irritability. I should have mentioned rage as well. That's a big one. It's just they really fluctuate with the comorbidity of an ED. Lastly is energy. So a lot of people think very low energy because they're intaking less energy and taking less calories. And of course, right, this can be defined by lots of interest in pleasurable things, sleeping more, irregular sleeping patterns. or it can also be characterized by very high energy. So taking on too much, being a superhuman, staying really, really busy. This is also a characteristic, sometimes driven by a perfectionism there, right? So again, like just because they're not getting enough energy food wise, it doesn't mean that they could be running on empty. The next is do's and don'ts, and Mallory's going to take us from here.
Yeah, so now that Kendra sort of gave us a really great overview of what some of the signs are, what to sort of be aware of, we thought it might be helpful to go into some do's and don'ts. And we really do want to preface this with the fact that we don't want anyone that's a part of this webinar tonight to sort of think back about past conversations they've had with their loved ones and feel as though they might have said the wrong thing or beat themselves up for a conversation that occurred. If anything, we want to stress tonight that eating disorders are extremely complex, and it is not uncommon for conflict to occur as you support somebody who's dealing with some of these concerns. These are just some tips and tricks to sort of keep in mind as you navigate these tough conversations. And the first one being, set a private time and place to talk. I think this goes for any challenge in life. Nobody wants their personal issues addressed in front of a large crowd. If you feel as though you need to discuss your concerns, do so in a place that is safe for that person. So a really good example I hear a lot is folks might be confronted at the dinner table. Why aren't you eating? That's asked in front of a large group of individuals, and for that person, that can be extremely triggering and very difficult for them to sort of navigate and feel as though the spotlight is on them in that moment. The next piece is to use I statements. So it's a reminder to be aware of your language and your approach. We don't want to sound accusatory by stating things like, you don't eat anymore, you exercise too much. Instead, you really want to make sure that you're sticking to the behaviors here. I have noticed you have been skipping lunch for the last couple of weeks, and I'm concerned. I've observed you exercising in your room late at night, and I'd really like to talk about it. That really ensures that you are not blaming the individual. You're not judging them either. You're just sort of stating what you're noticing and reminding them that you're available for support. The next piece is externalize the illness. I really want to emphasize here that we have to recognize that the eating disorder is separate to your loved one. And that can really support you in seeing that the challenges that are accompanying having an eating disorder are a result of that eating disorder and not the person. It can also support that person that's suffering and remind them that they're not alone, nor are they being criticized for their behaviors, the way they're thinking, the way they're acting, right? There's something else at play. Lastly, I'd like to just remind everyone, be patient. Eating disorders are not resolved overnight, and change is really difficult for anybody. Eating disorder recovery can include setbacks. It's important to remind yourself and your loved one that recovery is possible.
Yeah, amazing. I'll pick it up. These are a couple of ones I really speak to as well. So supporting treatment. And supporting treatment always starts with a question: how can I support you? And it's going to look very, very different for each loved one, right? So maybe it's driving them to appointments, or even sitting with them after an appointment and talking and debriefing with them. Or maybe it's doing something rewarding, or doing something really, really challenging with your loved one, like going with them to go grocery shopping or eating a meal together. Looks really, really different for everyone, again, and it starts with a question. The second one I'd like to talk about is education, what you're doing right now. So education comes in many, many forms: webinars, research. Mallory and I are going to give some resources later in the next portion of our presentation, but also your own therapy as well. Mallory offers those supporting a loved one, right? So she can really detail a unique coaching plan with that. So education is super important. Lastly is self-care. Please do self-care. This is a it can be a really daunting role. It can be a very, very overwhelming task for an individual, supporting your loved one in this. So, getting a support circle, whatever self-care looks like to you, maybe after this presentation, you take a moment and reflect on what that looks like, whether it's social, emotional, or physical. Super, super important. So now I'll hand the don'ts off to Mallory to get us started off again.
Yeah, so the first don't on here is try to avoid oversimplifying solutions, right? Again, I'm going to stress how complex an eating disorder can be, and encouraging someone, just eat. I hear that a lot from some of my clients and their experience. It really does send the message that their suffering is their fault, and it's an easy switch, and they could simply turn it off. It can make them feel as though they're misunderstood, and it could cause some defensiveness as well. The next note is commenting on their appearance or their weight. And even though comments such as "you're beautiful, you don't have to change," like those can be so well intentioned, people with eating disorders are already very hyper focused on their appearance. And so even assurances by telling someone like "you look healthy" could be interpreted as though they're getting bigger, and even like strengthen their preoccupation with wanting to change, with wanting to be thinner. So it's really sort of important to stray from any comments about their appearance and focus on other things about that person that you're proud of, right? Like, what are their skill sets, what hobbies, interests, things they're good at? Like, those are really important things to remind them of. The next piece is don't talk about your own dieting habits or body image. I think that we are all we fall victim to this toxic society that promotes diet culture and standardized beauty. We use these terms in our everyday language that could really be harmful and especially triggering to somebody living with an eating disorder, experiencing disordered eating. So we want to ensure that we're modeling that sort of language and behavior that we accept everyone regardless of how they look. Food, we don't label food as junk or bad for us. Food is fuel that keeps our body moving and nourishes us. And so we want to ensure that that's the language that we're exposing that person to on a daily basis.
Yeah. I'll jump in here again. So try not to impose rules or control tactics. Again, usually these do come from a place of love, a lot of problem solving, a lot of, ensuring they are getting that nutrition. And it's a really scary thing to sit with, right? It's a really scary thing to support. So that's where the rules and control tactics tend to come from, but such as like forcing someone to eat or sitting and saying you're not leaving this table till this is finished, or ensuring they're eating. And even if it's coming from a loving place, the loved one might take it as they're trying to empower themselves, right? And what we're trying to do here is allow for the autonomy and empowerment of themselves in the recovery, right? So giving them that freedom, giving them that ability to empower themselves will really go a long way with recovery. And again, this goes back to asking, hey, how can I support you, right? The next one is financial and time costs. Again, this really, I understand usually this comes from a place of love, right? What do you mean I don't support you? I'm paying all this money for treatment, or, I'm driving you every time, like I'm spending an hour with you, etc. Right? Again, while this is coming from a place of love, it often translates into, oh, I'm a burden, right? Or they're spending so much money on me. What if recovery doesn't work? Or they're giving so much time up and nothing's working, kind of thing. So again, this is where your support circle can come in, or your therapist. Talk to that circle about these issues, right? Talk to that circle about the worries or time concerns. The last two are quite similar, and I'll start with the first. So ignoring and avoiding. Again, this is a really scary thing to deal with. But don't be afraid to talk about it, right? Open up the communication with your loved one. Talking about it, asking questions, even though you might get an eye roll, but asking questions and talking about it all, it opens up the communication line. It opens up a safe space. And when there's a safe space to talk about stuff, the shame and the silence that usually accompanies a mental health challenge like this, it dissipates. So opening that up and not ignoring and avoiding. And again, safe space can take time to build, which goes to Mallory's point of being patient. Yeah, and the last one is centering the ED. Again, this means that you're putting a lot of, like, all 100% of your emotions, your attention, your worries, your anxiety, all your thoughts, they go into stopping this ED, right? Stopping all of this. And again, this is a good reminder that, hey, this person is here, right? Very similar to the externalization of the ED. This person might want a reminder of that they are different, right? So do different activities together other than eating or supporting recovery. They are a full person, right? I'll just end off with, it's all about finding an imperfect balance. So between the do's and don'ts that Mallory and I discussed.
We thought this might be a really nice way to sort of close on this section of the do's and don'ts, right? With this quote that really resonated with both of us. Eating disorders have causes, and none of the causes are a choice. I think this is a really important reminder, as you navigate what works for your loved one, what is the support that they're looking for? What is the approach that sort of lands best for them? Above all else, approach those conversations with a place of compassion, right? And an understanding that what that person is dealing with is also really scary for them as well. And even just having those conversations with you can be really tough. And that's one step closer to recovery, right? Like, that's one step on their journey. And so I think this is just an important reminder to sort of like take a step back when you're feeling overwhelmed, and think about this.
All right, so what's available to you for support? So Mallory and I have gathered our favorite resources, and Mallory is going to share hers.
So the first one is the National Eating Disorder Information Center, short for NEDIC. They are a fantastic resource. Their office is run out of Toronto General Hospital's Eating Disorder Program. They currently operate a toll-free telephone line as well as a free online chat service. They will support those who themselves are experiencing an eating disorder or disordered eating, in addition to their loved ones. So family, caregivers, significant others are all welcome to sort of call in or access the chat and get some support. In addition to that, they have lots of information on their website. They also offer referrals, so they can actually determine approximate waitlist times for different eating disorder treatment programs, in addition to drop-in groups for carers, in addition to those who are dealing with these issues themselves. They also have some really wonderful outreach programs. More recently, they've gone into schools and done presentations on building self-esteem and positive body image in young people. I would encourage anyone to look them up and take a look.
Yeah, I'll talk about my favorite one. This is called Change Creates Change. This was started by an RD. And she also took up psychotherapy as well. I can't remember her name. That would have been a good thing to remember. But this is her organization, and she dedicates a large chunk of her resources to parents and to loved ones as well, right? So Change Creates Change. They put on many different programs. Put the Kettle On is a free virtual drop-in group for carers. Parents Empowered ED. There's online training for parents and carers. I believe it's like $100, but I just saw like recently that they have like a free edition too sometimes. So lots and lots of resources with that. There's free drop-in support meal groups. And this can be for you and your loved one as well. Nutrition consults, parent coaching, and tons of free webinar and resources. Once you get on their mailing list, they have the RD really speaks a lot of supporting your loved one in this. So yeah, it's a great organization. And then Mallory's gonna give us our last one.
So our last one is families empowered and supporting treatment for eating disorders, or short for FEAST. They really target those families, those caregivers who are looking for support. They have many caregiver education programs and free webinars. They also have an online parent support chat. I think one of the highlights to this resource is their online forums, where families can communicate with other families all around the world about different techniques, approaches. They can sort of support each other in some of the challenges that they're experiencing. I think there's really something to be said about connecting with others who are going through the same issues or have gone through them, and just learning about what worked and how to cope, and confiding in each other. So absolutely, FEAST is another really great resource out there.
Speaks a lot to our support circle encouragement. So yeah, tons of resources there. Yeah, and now we're on to questions. So we'll open up the floor for everyone here to write in the chat or turn your mics on. Anything you wish.
There's no specific questions either. You're welcome to comment on something that, might have surprised you about tonight, or something that stood out to you as well.
I just read one in the chat. Aside from the I statements, when you notice a concern about a loved one, do you have any other suggestions to initiate the conversation? Yeah. I'll chime in with just questions, right? Asking very open-ended questions, right? Mallory really said, don't start with an accusation or a blame. Just saying, hey, like, I noticed this, I did this, right? What can I do to support you? Anything like that. Yeah. Anything else to add, Mallory? What do you think?
I think those are great points. In addition to that, I would encourage you to sort of think about the environment, the time, and the place that you're going to have that conversation too, just to ensure it's at a time that feels right for that person. For example, if they're in the midst of trying to get through a meal, that might be a more difficult time to have the conversation. Doing so when you feel it'll be a little bit more well received is a good pointer to just think about.
And if it falls flat, if your question or your initiation falls flat, again, there's no perfect start. There's no perfect second start either. It may be up to them too, right? Just letting them know, hey, I'm open to chatting, or I'm open to talk, and leaving it with them. That can be helpful as well. It's empowering, and again, you're giving them the invite to the safe space. Yeah.
See another point here. Can you talk about supporting young people, perhaps adolescents, and if there are any differences when supporting adults? Yeah, I think that's a great question. I guess for myself, something that I think about with adolescents especially, and I think that this really does go for everyone, but I definitely see it more prevalent with the adolescent population, is around social media and exposure to some really sort of harmful body shaming, stigma, diet culture, things like that are just all over social media, especially things like TikTok, Instagram. And so something that I do like to sort of initiate in the beginning of working with a young person is around what type of media are they exposing themselves to, and is it media that's sort of making them feel good about themselves, or could it be really contributing? Could it be a factor that's really sort of causing them to question how they look, and if they're accepting of their appearance? With that being said, though, I think that is an important conversation to have with adults as well. But certainly for young people, it can be more prevalent.
I was thinking about different environments, I guess I'll say, right? So with adolescents, of course, there's the whole family as well, right? And of course, some young adults too live with their family too. So really building that connection, looking at how the family eats, looking at how, um, all of that, like looking at their different environments, right? So focusing on that, which can be quite different for adolescents versus a young adult living on their own, right? So growing the relationship with the parents and the child, and of course, like Mallory said, you can also do that with an adult too, but it's a little different, right? Living with your family versus not living with your family, right? And the different types of support can change as well. Yeah. And again, another question. Thank you, Jennifer. Can you recommend any good books or podcasts? What do you think, Mallory?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute there. There is a great resource out there. I'm just gonna ensure I have the correct title. Talking to eating disorders. And so talking to eating disorders is a great book that's really targeting that population of carers and those who are looking for some advice and tips on how to support somebody who might be dealing with some of these challenges. It's available on Amazon. Yeah, that's a really great resource.
Awesome. And my area of focus is more with the loved ones itself. So I really like Health at Every Size. Podcasts. I don't know. I'm not a really big podcaster in that area, but yeah, more of a murder mystery kind of gal. But yeah, good question.
With that being said, though, if I'm confident if you head to the NETIC website, they will have a list of different podcasts, books, tons of resources out there related to eating disorders. Thank you for those questions. Is there anything else? Any questions, comments?
Thank you, Mia.
Thank you, Mia, for your kind comment.
All right. Well, I'm sure any questions too can be referred to Shift too. If there's any afterthoughts or anything like that, definitely shoot our care team an email, and Mallory and I will definitely get it and would be happy to respond. Well, yeah, starting is the hardest part, and me and Mallory really think you got this. So thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, any parting words, Mallory?